Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we were taking you, the learner, straight into a huge shift happening in global business. We're going to tackle the corporate real estate game across Asia Pacific, and it's going through this quiet but really dramatic revolution. For decades, corporate expansion was simple. You'd sign a massive multi-year lease, plant a flag, and you were committed. But that whole era is, well, it seems to be ending. We've been looking at sources that detail how companies are moving staff, even entire teams, by completely sidestepping those huge contracts. They're using flexible, extended stay solutions instead. So think service departments, specialized corporate hotels, and these fully kitted out serviced offices. They're really custom built for professionals who need to stay somewhere longer than just a week.
That's absolutely right. And our core mission today is to really unpack the source material to see how this is all working. We need to understand why these major corporations, especially in a market as traditionally rigid as Hong Kong, are just abandoning the classic long-term lease. It all comes down to a strategic need for agility. The whole regional market is defined by speed and increasingly geopolitical volatility.
It really is a fundamental rethink, isn't it, of what a corporate footprint even means anymore. This isn't just about cutting costs. It's about building in the ability to scale up, scale down, or pivot your entire operation in, a matter of days or weeks? Not years.
Precisely. And if we look at the sources, there are really three main forces driving this. First, a big change in office supply. Second, the acute pressure of talent relocation. And third, the demand for immediate, ready-to-go solutions for those extended stays you mentioned, for when people are living and working abroad.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start on the ground in Hong Kong, because that market is a perfect example of this whole power dynamic just flipping on its head. What was the old standard, and what are we seeing now?
The old standard was rigid. It was punitive and completely landlord-driven. Imagine signing a lease that was almost always 3 years, sometimes even 5, with basically zero ability to break it. Companies were forced to guess their headcount years into the future, and if they got it wrong, well, they paid dearly for it.
So the landlords held all the cards. But you're saying tenant bargaining power has surged. What market forces actually created that shift?
Two big factors converged, and they created a kind of perfect storm for tenants. First, there was a huge sustained increase in the supply of new, high-quality Grade A office buildings.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Grade A isn't just nice office space. We're talking top tier. New construction, prime spots, all the modern amenities.
Exactly. And the market was just saturated with it. Historically, new Grade A space would get snapped up, but that wasn't happening this time. Which brings us to the second factor. Vacancy rates have been climbing steadily since 2019, and that was combined with softer demand from key corporate sectors. So when you have a huge amount of premium space just sitting empty, landlords start to feel the pain, and their appetite for negotiation just skyrockets.
I get the supply and demand, but is the financial incentive really there for a big bank to switch to short-term, flexible options? Isn't the per-desk cost of a serviced office way higher than what you get when you commit to a 5-year lease?
That's the critical question, and it's really where the traditional model just fails to account for risk. Sure, the rent per square foot might be lower on paper for a long lease, but the actual cost includes this massive upfront capital expenditure. Fitting out the space, buying furniture, setting up all the IT.
All the soft costs.
The soft costs, the CapEx. By going flexible, you turn that capital expenditure into operational expenditure. You pay a bit more each month, but you avoid a multi-million-dollar fit-out that just becomes a sunk cost the moment your plans change. The leverage tenants have now is all focused on minimizing that long-term risk.
So practically speaking, what does that look like in a negotiation today versus, say, 5 years ago?
The tenants are demanding two things now. Shorter lease lengths. They're pushing for 1 or 2 years instead of the standard 3 and critically really robust lease break clauses.
The escape hatch.
Exactly, the escape hatch. But we should probably define that for you.
Yeah, give us the technical details. What is that?
A lease break clause is a pre-negotiated mechanism that lets the tenant terminate the agreement early. In the past, they were extremely rare. Now, they're a standard expectation. So if you sign a 3-year lease, you might have an option to terminate after 18 months. The penalty is usually pretty severe, maybe 3 to 6 months of rent, but you know that risk up front.
So it's a known cost for getting maximum flexibility instead of this undefined massive legal fight if you need to get out early.
Exactly right. Landlords get it now. Offering that flexibility, even with a penalty, is sometimes the only way to lock in a high-quality tenant in a competitive market. And this dynamic leads directly to what people are calling the core and flex model.
Mm.
Companies keep a smaller, stable core office for HQ functions, but then they rely on flexible office centers to absorb temporary teams or projects, all without those massive commitments.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The internal market shift tenants getting more power, that was happening anyway. But it was massively accelerated by these powerful external pressures that forced talent and companies to rethink their entire APAC strategy.
This is what we're calling the Hong Kong effect, where specific policy decisions just made the city functionally difficult for global business. The biggest driver for talent relocation was the city's strict COVID-19 policies.
Policies that, our sources say, often mirrored mainland China's zero COVID approach. So we're talking long, difficult quarantines, unpredictable travel bans.
Precisely. And that approach created a lot of unease, especially in the expat community and high mobility sectors like finance. Financial firms, I mean, they rely on cross-border travel. They were citing the fact their staff couldn't travel freely as being hugely detrimental to Hong Kong's status as a global hub. You can't run a regional asset management firm if your partners can't fly to Singapore or Tokyo without facing a week in a hotel when they get back.
And the impact was huge, and you can measure it. This wasn't just a few people complaining. The sources say that between mid-2021 and mid-2022, over 113,000 residents left Hong Kong. Many of them explicitly said they were relocating for easier travel. That is a massive, sudden talent drain.
And that outflow was made up of a critical mass of professionals, finance, tech, specialized services, the very people companies need to do high-value business. And the COVID situation was then compounded by geopolitical factors. The protests starting in 2019, the introduction of the national security law. For a lot of multinational corporations, this just added layers of business and regulatory uncertainty that they have to start pricing into their risk assessments.
So if you're a company and you have to choose between keeping your top talent or keeping your office in Hong Kong, and your talent is demanding easier travel, where do you go? Singapore seems to have been the immediate answer.
Singapore was definitely the main beneficiary in this whole dynamic, and they were very strategically positioned to absorb that influx. While Hong Kong was dealing with restrictive policies, Singapore was offering political stability, a neutral stance, and most importantly, an open border policy. It made international travel frictionless. They also adapted their infrastructure really quickly to support this kind of temporary relocation, streamlining visas for high-skilled workers.
And this is where that need for professional extended stay solutions just becomes critical. If a bank decides to move a team of 30 people from Hong Kong to Singapore next month, they can't wait 3 months for a residential lease to be signed and an office to be fitted out. They need to be able to live and work abroad, like, immediately.
Correct. The demand for flexible housing, service departments, and those specialized corporate hotels, it just surged in Singapore. Companies were moving their non-China related jobs there
Yeah.
specifically to make sure staff could travel and, hit the ground running.
But let's be balanced here. The sources do remind us that Hong Kong's commercial power is deeply embedded. Do these short-term shocks really spell the end for its dominance? Or is this more of a moment in time?
That's the strategic dilemma every CEO in the region is facing. Hong Kong still has decades of financial infrastructure, a strong common law foundation, and these business networks that you just can't replicate overnight. The city's commercial gravity is still immense. The challenge for companies is really assessing their comfort level with the government structure versus that undeniable commercial power. What we're seeing is a strategy of diversification, not necessarily total abandonment.
Which brings us right back to the solution. Whether you're moving a team to Singapore or just right-sizing in Hong Kong, the issue is the same. How do you house and office people for these extended stays without the burden of those old long-term contracts?
And the answer is that the old fixed lease model is functionally obsolete for modern business. It's too expensive, too slow, and way too risky.
That analogy you made about buying a suit that fits today but won't in 5 years really rings true. That lack of agility becomes a direct financial penalty.
It creates a massive financial anchor. If a tech firm goes fully hybrid 6 months after signing a 3-year lease, they're suddenly paying for thousands of square feet of empty space. If they have to shift resources because of some sudden geopolitical event, that physical footprint becomes a colossal, immediate liability.
So the industry is moving rapidly to flexible office space serviced offices, co-working centers as the direct answer. But how does a company of, say, 100 people actually put this core and flex model into practice?
The implementation is key, and it's where you see the real savings. For their core staff, they might keep a small, stable, traditional lease, maybe 20% of their old footprint, but the other 80% of capacity is handled by flexible space. And this dramatically cuts down the setup time. A traditional office build-out can take 3 to 6 months. A serviced office is ready to go in 3 days.
3 months versus 3 days. That's a game-changing speed.
It absolutely is. These flexible centers deliver instant benefits. Ready-to-go offices, high-speed internet reception services, IT support, meeting rooms, all included. And crucially, they're rentable by the month or even by the day, so you can scale up or down so easily.
But isn't there a risk of diluting your company's brand or culture? If your headquarters is just a couple of desks in a shared hub, do you lose that critical brand identity?
That's the main challenge of the new model, and companies are tackling it with design and strategy. The core office becomes the cultural anchor. It's the highly branded space you use for client meetings and key collaboration. The flexible space is for the more transactional, project-based teams. It's all about right-sizing their footprint. Sources suggest that by using this model, especially in high-cost cities, companies can cut their total real estate spending by 15 to 25% a year.
And that metric, 15 to 25%, that is the compelling financial argument for making the change.
And it extends beyond the office. When you move an entire team, they need somewhere comfortable to live so they can work abroad effectively. That's where this shift to using professional extended stay solutions really comes in. Companies need to quickly find service departments or corporate hotels for stays that might last 6 months, maybe a year, without the headache of a traditional lease. It's about minimizing disruption for the professional.
So it means if you're a tenant looking for space or corporate housing in the region today, the whole focus is shifted to the contract terms, pushing landlords and providers to just be way more agile.
Correct. Tenants have to negotiate aggressively for those flexible terms. We mentioned the break clause, but they're also negotiating the initial lease period, demanding 1 or 2 years instead of 3. And they're demanding shorter commitments on these extended stay housing solutions too. This level of adaptability has just become a basic requirement for any company operating in the region.
So, to synthesize this for you, our listener, the age of the fixed multi-year contract as the default for business expansion is, well, it's over in Asia Pacific. Companies are now systematically looking at their needs. Do they need a permanent branded presence, or are they better off with a hyper-flexible, temporary setup?
They're exploring every option: serviced offices, serviced apartments, anything that lets their professionals and their teams move and settle into new locations quickly. This whole approach allows them to adjust their real estate footprint in direct response to these rapidly changing geopolitical and economic factors. They're using shorter agreements and break clauses to mitigate risk. That balance between stability and maximum adaptability is really the new standard in APAC.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought. We've seen how real estate is actively dismantling its reliance on long-term commitments, putting flexibility above all else just to survive. So, if agility is now the most critical component for corporate success in Asia, what established sector outside of real estate and corporate housing is next? What industry will be forced to fundamentally dismantle its reliance on massive long-term contracts and embrace maximum flexibility? Think about supply chains, hiring practices, financing models that have been around for 50 years, something for you to chew on until our next deep dive.